On the crisp autumn morning of October 12th, 2011, the illusion of peace in Harmony Creek was shattered. The small, close-knit town, nestled in the rolling hills of the American Midwest, awoke to the discordant sound of sirens slicing through the morning mist. In a community where the most pressing news was usually the outcome of the high school football game, the sight of police cruisers descending on a quiet residential street signaled a profound and unwelcome change. What had happened in the modest blue-trimmed house on Elm Street to warrant such a grave response? The house belonged to Sarah Jenkins, a 26-year-old woman who embodied the town's most cherished values. She was known for her radiant smile, her tireless work ethic, and a kindness that seemed to touch everyone she met. When she failed to show up for her morning shift at the town's only law firm, her boss, a man who viewed her more like a daughter than an employee, felt an immediate and uncharacteristic pang of dread. It was this call, born of concern, that led police to her front door and to the discovery that would plunge Harmony Creek into a state of collective grief and fear. Inside, investigators found a scene of disarray that spoke of a violent struggle. Furniture was overturned, and personal belongings were scattered across the floor, suggesting a robbery that had escalated into something far more tragic. In the living room, they found Sarah. Her life, so full of promise and ambition, had been brutally cut short. The initial assessment was grim, and the medical examiner would later confirm she had died from blunt force trauma. As the quiet town began to process the unthinkable, a single agonizing question hung in the air. Who could have done this to Sarah Jenkins, the bright, beloved young woman who represented the very best of Harmony Creek? Sarah Jenkins was, by all accounts, a daughter of Harmony Creek in the truest sense. She had been born in the local hospital, attended the same schools as her parents, and after a brief, successful stint at a state university, she had returned home. Her return was not a retreat, but a deliberate choice, driven by a deep love for her community and a clear-eyed vision for her future within it. She believed in the town's potential, and more importantly, in her own ability to contribute to it. Her days were a testament to her ambition. She worked as a paralegal at Miller & Croft, a small but respected law practice on the town square. Her superiors saw in her a sharp mind and an unwavering dedication that set her apart. She was meticulous, organized, and possessed a quiet confidence that belied her years. Colleagues admired her, not just for her professional competence, but for the small acts of kindness that defined her character. Remembering birthdays, offering a helping hand without being asked, and always having a patient, listening ear. But her ambitions extended beyond the walls of the law firm. Sarah's ultimate dream was to own the Daily Grind, the town's central coffee shop and social hub. It was a place where friendships were forged over steaming mugs and where the town's news was shared in hushed tones. The current owner, an older woman named Eleanor Vance, had been a mentor to Sarah, and the two had been in quiet talks for months about a potential sale. Sarah spent her evenings and weekends not just dreaming, but planning. She meticulously saved every spare dollar, drafted business plans late into the night, and researched suppliers and local artisans to feature in her reimagined cafe. Her vision was to create a space that was more than just a place to buy coffee. She wanted it to be a true community living room, a place that reflected the warmth and spirit of Harmony Creek. This dream was not a secret. She shared it openly with her friends and family. And her enthusiasm was infectious. Everyone who knew her believed she would succeed, because Sarah Jenkins simply did not fail at things she set her mind to. Her personal life was as well regarded as her professional one. She was a devoted daughter to her parents, who lived just a few miles outside of town. She was the reliable older sister to her younger brother, a college student she advised and supported with unwavering loyalty. She had a close-knit circle of friends who had been with her since childhood, a bond forged in the shared experiences of growing up in a small town. They described her as the anchor of their group, the planner, the peacemaker, the one who always showed up. The only recent turbulence in her otherwise steady life had been her breakup with Mark Peterson. They had dated for nearly 2 years, a relationship that many in town had assumed would lead to marriage. Mark was a local contractor, a handsome and hard-working man, but one who possessed a more volatile temperament than the ever-calm Sarah. Their breakup, about 2 months prior to her death, had been difficult and, according to friends, emotionally charged. It was a rare note of discord in the symphony of Sarah's well-ordered life, a detail that, in the coming days, would take on a dark and ominous significance. Music. The investigation into Sarah Jenkins's death began with the methodical precision typical of a major crime. Detectives from the county sheriff's department took the lead, assisted by the small Harmony Creek police force. The crime scene was a chaotic puzzle. The ransacked state of the house immediately pointed towards a robbery, a crime of opportunity that had turned deadly. A window in the back of the house was found unlocked, suggesting a possible point of entry. Forensic technicians swept through the home, dusting for fingerprints, collecting fibers, and documenting every detail. They noted that Sarah's purse was overturned on the floor, its contents spilled out. Her wallet was empty of cash, though her credit cards remained. A jewelry box in her bedroom was also open and appeared to have been rummaged through, with several pieces missing. These details strongly supported the initial theory of a botched burglary, yet certain elements did not quite fit. Experienced investigators felt a subtle dissonance in the scene. The disarray seemed almost too perfect, too theatrical. While some items of value were taken, others, a laptop computer on the kitchen table, a brand new television in the living room, were left untouched. This was unusual for a typical smash-and-grab burglary, where thieves would likely take high-value electronics. The coroner's preliminary report provided a crucial timeline. Sarah had likely died sometime in the late evening of October 11th. There were signs of a struggle, indicating she had fought back against her attacker. The cause of death was confirmed as multiple blows to the head with a heavy, blunt object. The murder weapon was not immediately apparent at the scene. It had either been taken by the killer or was an ordinary household item that was not obviously out of place. As detectives began their canvass of the neighborhood, they spoke to residents on Elm Street, hoping someone had seen or heard something unusual. A neighbor across the street recalled seeing a dark-colored sedan parked near Sarah's house around 9 o'clock the previous evening, a car she did not recognize. Another neighbor, an elderly man who often sat by his window, mentioned hearing what sounded like a heated argument, a raised voice, but he could not be sure from where it had come and had dismissed it as a domestic squabble from a passing car. The first 48 hours of a homicide investigation are critical, and the detectives' focus quickly turned from the crime scene to Sarah's personal life. They needed to understand her world to find who might have wanted to harm her. They started by interviewing her family and closest friends, building a portrait of a woman with no known enemies. Her parents were devastated, lost in a fog of grief, unable to fathom who could commit such a monstrous act against their gentle daughter. Her friends told police about her dreams for the coffee shop, her dedication to her job, and her recent breakup with Mark Peterson. It was during these initial interviews that Mark's name began to surface repeatedly. Friends described the breakup as painful for both of them. Sarah, they said, had ended the relationship because she felt they were on different paths. She was focused on her career and business goals, while Mark, in her view, was less settled. They also mentioned that Mark had a temper and had not taken the breakup well. He had reportedly called and texted her frequently in the weeks following their split, pleading with her to reconsider. Some of these messages had been angry and frustrated, According to one friend, Sarah had confided that Mark had shown up at her house, unannounced, about a week before her death, leading to a tense conversation on her doorstep. This information immediately elevated Mark Peterson from a grieving ex-boyfriend to a person of significant interest in the investigation. Detectives brought Mark in for his first interview. He was visibly shaken, his eyes red-rimmed with sorrow. He told police he had loved Sarah and was horrified by what had happened. He cooperated fully, answering their questions about his relationship with her and the circumstances of their breakup. He admitted he had been heartbroken and had tried to win her back, but he vehemently denied having anything to do with her death. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of October 11th, Mark's story became less clear. He said he had been at a local bar for a few hours after work, then had gone home alone. He could not provide a firm alibi for the later evening hours, the exact window of time during which the medical examiner believed Sarah had been killed. He had made no calls and sent no texts from his phone during that critical period. He had simply been at home, he claimed, watching television and falling asleep on his couch. The lack of a concrete alibi, combined with the history of a difficult breakup and a reported temper, was enough for investigators to place Mark Peterson at the very top of their suspect list. In a small town like Harmony Creek, news and gossip traveled fast. It did not take long for whispers about Mark's potential involvement to circulate through the community. The narrative began to form, a story of a spurned lover, unable to accept rejection, whose anger had boiled over into unimaginable violence. The pressure on the sheriff's department to make an arrest was immense. The town was terrified, and the community wanted answers. They wanted the monster who had stolen Sarah from them to be caught and punished. With the spotlight shining so brightly on Mark Peterson, the investigation began to narrow, focusing almost exclusively on building a case against him. Other avenues, other possibilities, began to fade into the background. The search of Mark's truck and his apartment yielded nothing conclusive. There were no traces of Sarah's blood, no fibers from the crime scene, and no murder weapon. However, investigators did find his phone, and a forensic analysis of his text messages to Sarah confirmed what her friends had said. His messages in the weeks after the breakup were a volatile mix of pleading, affection, and raw anger. In one text, sent about 2 weeks before her murder, he had written, "You can't just throw us away like this, Sarah. You'll regret it." To a detective looking for a motive, those words were damning. They painted a picture of a man obsessed and on the edge. The media, catching wind of the investigation's focus, began to report on the jilted ex-boyfriend angle. Mark's photo was soon on the local news, and his name was whispered in every corner of Harmony Creek. He found himself tried and convicted in the court of public opinion long before any charges were filed. His business as a contractor dried up overnight. Old friends crossed the street to avoid him. He was ostracized, a pariah in the town where he had lived his entire life. He continued to maintain his innocence, telling the few people who would still listen that he was being railroaded, but his protestations were lost in the rising tide of public certainty. He was, to almost everyone, the obvious killer. Investigators interviewed him again, this time with a more aggressive tone. They confronted him with the text messages and the lack of a solid alibi. They pressed him on his temper, bringing up a minor altercation he had been involved in years earlier at a bar. They constructed a timeline that placed him at Sarah's house on the night of the murder, arguing that he had gone there to confront her one last time, and that the confrontation had turned violent. When she fought back, he had killed her in a fit of rage and then, in a panic, staged the scene to look like a robbery. It was a plausible theory, and it fit the known facts. Or at least, it did not overtly contradict them. Mark grew frustrated and angry under the intense questioning, a reaction that the detectives interpreted as a sign of guilt, rather than the desperation of an innocent man under immense pressure. He hired a lawyer, which only served to make him look more guilty in the eyes of the public. The narrative was set in stone. The only thing missing was the single piece of hard, physical evidence that would tie him directly to the crime scene. Music. While the investigation centered on Mark Peterson, the forensic team completed its analysis of the evidence collected from Sarah's home. The results were frustratingly inconclusive. Dozens of fingerprints were lifted from the scene, but most belonged to Sarah herself, or to known friends and family who had been in the house recently. Several partial, smudged prints could not be identified and were run through state and national databases with no matches. Fibers and hairs collected did not match Mark Peterson or anyone else in the criminal database. The lack of his DNA under Sarah's fingernails was particularly significant, as it did not support the theory of a violent, hands-on struggle with him. His lawyer would later argue that this absence of evidence was, in fact, evidence of his innocence. But for the investigators and the public, it was merely a frustrating gap in an otherwise convincing circumstantial case. One small, peculiar piece of evidence had been collected from the living room floor, not far from where Sarah's body was found. It was a small, curved shard of glazed ceramic about the size of a thumbnail. It was brightly colored, with a distinctive pattern of blue and yellow swirls. Initially, it was logged as debris from a broken household item, likely a vase or a decorative bowl that had been shattered during the struggle. A cursory search of the home did not turn up any matching broken items, so it was bagged, labeled, and filed away, with the rest of the physical evidence considered of minor importance. Weeks turned into months, and the case against Mark Peterson remained stalled. The district attorney reviewed the file and concluded that while the circumstantial evidence was strong, it was not strong enough to guarantee a conviction. Without a confession, a murder weapon, or a direct forensic link, a skilled defense attorney could easily create reasonable doubt in the minds of a jury. The risk of losing the case and being unable to retry Mark was too high. Reluctantly, the active investigation was wound down. The case was not officially closed, but it entered a state of limbo, becoming one of the county's most painful and prominent cold cases. For the residents of Harmony Creek, however, the verdict was already in. Mark Peterson was the man who had gotten away with murder. He continued to live in the town, a constant, grim reminder of the justice that had been denied. The cloud of suspicion that hung over him was suffocating. He lost his home, his business crumbled completely, and he was forced to take odd jobs in neighboring towns where his name was not so infamous. He became a ghost in his own life, haunted by a crime he swore he did not commit. Sarah's parents, David and Mary Jenkins, were left in an agonizing state of unresolved grief. They had lost their daughter, and the man they believed was responsible was walking free. Their faith in the justice system was shattered. They channeled their pain into preserving Sarah's memory, establishing a small scholarship fund in her name at the local high school. It was their way of ensuring that the light their daughter had brought into the world would not be entirely extinguished by the darkness of her death. Years passed. The file on Sarah Jenkins's murder gathered dust on a shelf in the cold case unit. New crimes demanded the attention and resources of the sheriff's department. The town of Harmony Creek slowly, reluctantly, moved on, though the scar of that autumn night in 2011 never fully healed. The blue-trimmed house on Elm Street was sold, but its new owners often found bouquets of flowers left on their doorstep on the anniversary of Sarah's death. The story became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered to teenagers about the dangers of love gone wrong. Mark Peterson eventually left Harmony Creek. The weight of the town's judgment had become unbearable. He moved several states away, hoping to start over where no one knew his name or his story. But the past was a shadow he could not outrun. The accusation had changed him, leaving him isolated and mistrustful. He had lost not only his reputation, but also his faith in people. And so the case sat, frozen in time, a monument to a terrible loss and an incomplete investigation. The prevailing theory, accepted by nearly everyone, was that a guilty man had slipped through the cracks of the legal system. The truth, however, was far more complex and insidious, and it lay dormant, waiting for a fresh pair of eyes to find the one small detail that everyone else had missed. Music. In the spring of 2017, nearly 6 years after Sarah Jenkins was killed, a new detective named Isabella Rossi was assigned to the county's cold case unit. Detective Rossi was known for her tenacity and her refusal to accept long-held assumptions. Her approach was to re-examine every piece of evidence, every interview transcript, and every lab report as if the case had just begun. She believed that the passage of time could offer a new perspective, free from the emotional pressure and public outcry that often clouded an initial investigation. She spent weeks immersing herself in the Sarah Jenkins file. She read the witness statements, the police reports, and the psychological profile that had been developed for Mark Peterson. She understood why he had become the prime suspect. The narrative was compelling, the motive classic. But Detective Rossi was bothered by the complete lack of physical evidence connecting him to the scene. It felt too clean for a crime of passion, a supposed fit of rage that had resulted in a brutal, personal attack. Her attention was drawn to the evidence logs. She methodically went through each item, cross-referencing photos from the crime scene. She lingered on the entry for item number 73, ceramic shard. The photo showed the small, brightly colored piece of pottery. The original investigators had dismissed it as insignificant, but to Rossi, any unidentified object from a crime scene was a loose thread worth pulling. She requested that the physical evidence from the case be brought out of storage. Holding the small shard in a gloved hand, she felt it was different from a typical piece of a broken vase. The glaze was unique, and the craftsmanship seemed artisanal rather than mass-produced. On a hunch, she decided to explore a new avenue. She knew from the case file that Sarah had been deeply involved in the local community and had supported local artists and craftspeople for her coffee shop idea. Rossi wondered if the shard could have come from a piece made by a local potter. Her investigation led her to Clara Bellwether, a well-known local artist who had a small pottery studio on the outskirts of Harmony Creek. Clara was in her late 60s, with kind eyes and hands permanently stained with clay. She had been a friend of Sarah's family for years and had been devastated by the murder. Detective Rossi showed her a high-resolution photograph of the ceramic shard. Clara stared at the photo for a long moment, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock, and then to a dawning, horrified recognition. She told Rossi that she knew the pattern instantly. It was from a limited series of decorative plates she had created about 8 years prior. She had called the series Autumn Sunset, inspired by the colors of the Midwest sky. She had only made 12 of them, each one handcrafted and unique. This was the breakthrough Detective Rossi had been hoping for. The shard was not random debris. It was a specific, identifiable object. She asked Clara the most important question. Did she have records of who had purchased the 12 plates? Clara, a meticulous record keeper for her art, said she did. She went to an old filing cabinet and after a few minutes of searching, pulled out a ledger. Her finger ran down the list of names. She had sold them at a local art fair over a single weekend. Most of the buyers were from out of town, but 4 had been local residents. Detective Rossi's heart pounded as Clara read the names aloud. The first 3 were people who had no obvious connection to Sarah Jenkins, but the 4th name sent a jolt through the investigation. The 4th local buyer of an Autumn Sunset plate was Eleanor Vance. Eleanor Vance, the kindly, maternal owner of the Daily Grind, Sarah's mentor and friend. the woman who was supposed to sell Sarah her dream. In the original investigation, Eleanor had been interviewed as a grieving acquaintance. She had spoken glowingly of Sarah's ambition and kindness. Her alibi for the night of the murder had been simple and seemingly unbreakable. She had been at home, alone, watching a movie. She was never considered a suspect, not even for a fleeting moment. She was as much a part of the fabric of Harmony Creek as the town square clock tower. The discovery that a piece of a plate she owned was found at the scene of Sarah's murder changed everything. It was a direct physical link, something that had been missing from the case against Mark Peterson. Detective Rossi knew she had to proceed with extreme caution. Accusing a beloved town figure like Eleanor Vance based on a single piece of ceramic was a massive leap. She needed more. She needed to build a new case from the ground up, quietly and out of the public eye. Her first step was to delve into Eleanor Vance's life, starting with her finances. The original investigators had never looked into her background because she was not a suspect. Rossi subpoenaed Eleanor's bank records, credit card statements, and loan applications for the past decade. What she found was staggering and painted a picture of a woman living a secret, desperate life. Far from being the successful small business owner she appeared to be, Eleanor was drowning in debt. The records revealed years of high-interest loans, maxed-out credit cards, and most damningly, a series of large cash withdrawals from accounts linked to online gambling sites. She had a severe, hidden gambling addiction that had drained her savings and the profits from the coffee shop. She was on the brink of financial ruin, facing foreclosure on her home and the loss of her business. Suddenly, her relationship with Sarah Jenkins took on a new, sinister light. Detective Rossi went back to the original case file and reread the interviews about Sarah's plan to buy the daily grind. Sarah had been working with the bank and had recently secured a significant business loan. The final paperwork had been approved, and a cashier's check for the down payment, a sum of nearly $50,000, had been issued to Sarah just 2 days before her death. According to Sarah's friends, she had been ecstatic. She had planned to meet with Eleanor on October 12th, the morning she was found, to present the check and finalize their agreement. That check was never found at the crime scene. In the chaos of the initial investigation and the focus on the robbery gone wrong theory, its absence had been overlooked. It was assumed the robbers had taken it along with the cash from her wallet, but no one had ever tried to cash or deposit it. Rossi now had a powerful motive. Eleanor needed that money desperately. $50,000 would not solve all her problems, but it would be a lifeline, enough to pay off her most urgent creditors and keep her afloat a little longer. The sale of the coffee shop, which everyone saw as Sarah's dream coming true, was, for Eleanor, a transaction that would expose her financial ruin. Once the sale was complete, she would have no steady income, and the money from the sale would be immediately seized by her debtors. The theory that began to form in Detective Rossi's mind was cold and calculating. Eleanor had not wanted to sell the shop. She had wanted Sarah's money. She had lured Sarah into believing the sale was imminent, knowing that Sarah would soon have a large amount of cash or a cashier's check in her possession. She had cultivated a relationship of trust, positioning herself as a mentor, all while secretly planning to betray Sarah in the most brutal way imaginable. The new narrative was chillingly plausible. Eleanor had gone to Sarah's house on the night of October 11th, perhaps under the guise of discussing the final details of the sale. An argument had ensued when Eleanor made her move to get the money. Sarah, strong and principled, would have fought back. In the struggle, Eleanor, in a moment of panic or cold-blooded rage, had grabbed a heavy object and killed her. During the fight, the decorative plate, perhaps brought as a gift or knocked from a surface, had shattered. Eleanor had then staged the scene to look like a robbery. Knowing that Sarah's recent, messy breakup with Mark Peterson would provide the perfect scapegoat. The plan was both diabolical and, for a time, perfectly successful. She had correctly predicted that the police and the town would immediately suspect the volatile ex-boyfriend. She had played the part of the grieving friend, offering her condolences to Sarah's parents and expressing her shock to investigators. She had watched as an innocent man's life was destroyed, all while she held the secret of her own unforgivable crime. Detective Rossi now had a motive, a physical link to the crime scene, and a compelling new theory of the crime. But she still needed to break Eleanor's alibi and, if possible, find the murder weapon and the missing cashier's check. She planned her next steps with surgical precision. She would need a search warrant for Eleanor Vance's home and business, and she would need to interview her again, this time not as a witness, but as the prime suspect in the murder of Sarah Jenkins. The sleeping case was now wide awake, and it was hurtling towards a conclusion that no one in Harmony Creek could have ever predicted. Music. Armed with a search warrant, Detective Rossi and a team of investigators arrived at Eleanor Vance's home on a quiet Tuesday morning. Eleanor answered the door with a look of polite confusion, an expression that quickly curdled into one of fear as Rossi explained the reason for their visit. While one team of detectives began a systematic search of the house, Rossi sat with Eleanor in her living room, beginning the most critical interview of the case. Eleanor initially stuck to her original story. She portrayed herself as a heartbroken mentor, still mourning the tragic loss of the bright young woman who had been like a daughter to her. She spoke of Sarah's vibrant energy and her wonderful plans for the coffee shop. When Rossi asked about her financial situation, Eleanor became defensive, claiming her business was stable and her personal finances were private. She denied having any significant debts. Meanwhile, the search team was making progress. In a dining room hutch, they found a set of decorative plates displayed on a shelf. They were handcrafted with a distinctive pattern of blue and yellow swirls. They were autumn sunset plates. There were 3 of them. According to the artist, Clara Bellwether, they had been sold as a set of 4. One was missing. In the garage, buried beneath a pile of old gardening supplies in a dusty corner, investigators found a heavy steel tire iron. It was wrapped in a plastic bag. Subsequent forensic analysis would reveal microscopic traces of blood and hair that had been missed by a cursory cleaning. DNA testing would later confirm that the blood and hair belonged to Sarah Jenkins. It was the murder weapon, hidden for 6 years. Back in the living room, Detective Rossi calmly and deliberately laid out the evidence she had uncovered. She told Eleanor about the gambling debts, the impending foreclosure, and the mountain of financial pressure she was under. Eleanor's composure began to crack. Her denials became weaker, her voice trembling. Rossi then told her about the ceramic shard found at the crime scene and how it had been matched to the limited edition plates made by Clara Bellwether. Finally, Rossi gestured towards the dining room, where another detective was holding one of the matching plates. She asked Eleanor, "Where is the 4th plate, Eleanor?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor Vance crumbled. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained for 6 years disintegrated in an instant. Through a torrent of tears, a story of desperation, greed, and horrific violence began to pour out. Her confession mirrored the theory Detective Rossi had developed. She admitted she had never intended to sell the coffee shop to Sarah. Her plan all along had been to get her hands on the loan money. She had gone to Sarah's house that night with one of the decorative plates, offering it as a celebratory gift to mark their new partnership. It was a Trojan horse, an excuse to get inside and find the cashier's check. She had asked Sarah to see the check, claiming she wanted to show it to her accountant. When Sarah, sensing something was wrong, refused, Eleanor's desperation took over. She had demanded the check, and an argument had erupted. Sarah had tried to make her leave, and in the ensuing struggle, the plate had been knocked to the floor and shattered. The argument escalated into a physical fight. Eleanor, terrified that Sarah would now expose her, had panicked. She confessed that she had grabbed a heavy glass award from Sarah's bookshelf and had struck her with it. When Sarah fell, wounded but still alive, Eleanor's panic turned into a cold, murderous resolve. She knew she could not leave a witness. She went to her car, retrieved the tire iron she kept in her trunk for emergencies, returned to the house, and delivered the final, fatal blows. After the horrific act, her mind had raced. She knew she had to cover her tracks. She ransacked the house, taking the cash from Sarah's wallet and some inexpensive jewelry to create the illusion of a robbery. She found the cashier's check for $50,000 in Sarah's work bag, and she meticulously cleaned the glass award, placing it back on the shelf, hoping no one would notice the faint traces of blood. She had overlooked the small piece of the broken plate that had skittered under a sofa. It was a tiny mistake, but it would ultimately be her undoing. She then drove to a remote bridge over a deep river miles outside of town and threw the cashier's check into the water, realizing it was too risky to ever try and cash it. The money was lost, but she believed she had gotten away with murder. She had heard the rumors about Sarah's breakup with Mark Peterson and knew that he, with his temper and broken heart, would make the perfect suspect. All she had to do was remain quiet and play the part of the grieving friend. Eleanor Vance was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Sarah Jenkins. The news of her arrest sent shockwaves through Harmony Creek. The community was stunned into disbelief. The woman who had served them coffee and pastries for 2 decades, who was known for her warm smile and gentle demeanor, was a cold-blooded killer. It was a truth so monstrous, so contrary to everything they thought they knew, that many found it impossible to accept at first. The reaction quickly turned to a profound sense of collective guilt. The town had been so certain of Mark Peterson's guilt. They had shunned him, judged him, and effectively driven him from his home. Now they were forced to confront the terrible reality that they had not only been wrong, but they had actively participated in the persecution of an innocent man, all while the real killer walked among them, sharing in their feigned grief. Music. The trial of Eleanor Vance was a somber affair that captivated the entire region. The prosecution, led by the district attorney who had once been hesitant to charge Mark Peterson, laid out its case with methodical precision. They presented the financial records that detailed Eleanor's secret life of debt and desperation. They called Clara Bellwether to the stand, who identified the ceramic shard as coming from the plate she had sold to Eleanor. Forensic experts testified that Sarah's DNA was found on the tire iron recovered from Eleanor's garage. And the centerpiece of the prosecution's case was Eleanor's own videotaped confession, a chilling account of her calculated betrayal and brutal actions. The defense attorney attempted to argue that the confession had been coerced and that Eleanor had been manipulated by a desperate financial situation, but the evidence was simply overwhelming. Perhaps the most poignant testimony came from Sarah's parents. David and Mary Jenkins took the stand and spoke about their daughter's dreams, her boundless optimism, and the deep trust she had placed in Eleanor Vance. They described the profound and unending pain of their loss, a pain that had been compounded for 6 years by the belief that their daughter's killer was walking free. Their grief was palpable in the silent courtroom. After a trial that lasted just over a week, the jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. They found Eleanor Vance guilty of first-degree murder. At her sentencing, she offered no apology, showing no remorse for her actions. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served for Sarah Jenkins. The aftermath of the trial brought a difficult reckoning for the town of Harmony Creek. The sheriff's department issued a formal public apology to Mark Peterson for the direction of the initial investigation and the hardship he had endured. Several community leaders and old friends reached out to him, offering their own heartfelt apologies. But for Mark, the exoneration was a hollow victory. The years of suspicion had taken an irreversible toll on his life. While his name was cleared, the scars of the accusation remained. He never returned to live in Harmony Creek. For the Jenkins family, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but it could never fill the void left by Sarah's absence. They continued to honor her memory through the scholarship fund, which grew significantly with donations from a community eager to atone for its collective misjudgment. The fund would go on to help dozens of young people from Harmony Creek pursue their own dreams, a fitting legacy for a woman whose own dreams had been so cruelly stolen. The story of Sarah Jenkins became a permanent part of the town's history. It served as a tragic lesson about the danger of assumptions and the seductive power of a simple narrative. It revealed how easily a community, in its desire for quick answers and a clear villain, could be led astray. The real monster was not the obvious suspect, but the one hiding in plain sight, concealed behind a mask of friendship and normalcy. The Daily Grind coffee shop was sold to a new owner, but its atmosphere was forever changed. Patrons would sometimes look around the familiar space and remember the bright young woman who had dreamed of making it her own. They would remember her smile, her ambition, and her fundamental goodness. And they would remember the devastating truth that the deepest betrayals often come from those we trust the most. Harmony Creek was a quieter, sadder, and perhaps wiser town in the wake of the tragedy. The illusion of perfect peace had been broken, replaced by the sober understanding that darkness could fester anywhere, even behind the most welcoming of doors. The case stands as a powerful reminder of the importance of diligent, unbiased police work. It underscores how a single, overlooked detail, a small shard of pottery, can hold the key to unlocking the truth, even years after a crime has been committed. It is a testament to the idea that no case is ever truly cold as long as there is someone willing to look again, to question the accepted story, and to follow the evidence wherever it may lead, no matter how uncomfortable the destination. Sarah Jenkins's life was a story of hope and potential, and her death became a somber lesson in justice, memory, and the long, difficult road to uncovering the truth. If you found this case compelling, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell to stay updated on similar true crime investigations. Until next time, stay alert, stay compassionate, and never underestimate the importance of looking out for those around you.